Welcome to ESGX Live, the community for information and education to inspire collaboration and action on all things to do with sustainability to create a more sustainable and more resilient economy, something that a lot of people, of course, have been talking about. With me, Nigel Lake in New York, and usually with my co-host Paul Herman in San Francisco, who I know is caught up in a whole series of things today. So a very good afternoon to everyone in the Americas. Good evening if you're joining us further to the east, and good morning in the west. And coming up, we have Perespen Stoknes and later Belen Paez. But first, we are going to have a very special welcome today from Manari, who has just joined us and I hope is ready. So welcome, Manari, and I will hand over to you.
Gracias. Hola.
Hola, everything looks good, Manari, so welcome, and please make your welcome for us.
Hola.
Gracias, Manari. Estamos listos para empezar. Te damos la bienvenida y ahora tú puedes empezar y hacer tu ceremonia del espacio sagrado. Gracias.
Ya, ahorita no, despuesito.
Ahora mismo. Vas a abrir el espacio. Gracias, Manari.
Ya. Yo voy a hacer una ceremonia para llamar al espíritu, más que todo del futuro, para revisar el pasado y de esa forma para conectar con el presente, con el ahora. Eso es lo que se va a tratar mi ceremonia, porque es muy importante lo que hablar del revisar una economía del futuro. ¿Alguien me va a ayudar a traducir?
Estamos traduciendo en el chat. So thank you, everyone. This is a very special moment to open your hearts, your minds, for the economies and future economies. So let's bring the spirit from the forest and let's bring the spirits from the new paradigms and new shifts that we must do in this moment in our lifetimes. And I'll connect all of you with the forest to start this presentation.
Entonces yo voy a hacer una ceremonia y cantaré una ikara llamando estos espíritus.
I will do a short ceremony for you, and I will call all these spirits from the north and from the south, so everyone can connect in this moment.
Voy a cerrar el ojo.
Please close your eyes.
y a una camba sumaya chaiwa ni cha kaya urasti ti ya chayawan yêu na các bà gia cháy cháy nhau ba tôn đây đi xa ya xuống mà vô dài hoàng cái má cháy là xuống mà cả phố của mô cam ba ya cháy hoàng cam ba du dây hoàng châu pin phun dây sa ya nhốt cành chỉ ta su ma ta nhốt ta chỉ cao xây ta mình cây ô cô cam ba ya cháy quăng nhiều cánh trên tàu xây tàn xuống mang tàn tổ mong y yang na cánh ba ya cháy hoàng nhiều cánh trên suốt mà cao xa na vô dây ta xuống mang ta bố mong el espíritu del pasado, el espíritu del presente, nos envía un mensaje de crear una nueva forma de relacionar con la vida en el mundo, más que todo, cambiar la forma de entender a la selva, a la tierra, el agua, el aire, porque nosotros también somos seres espirituales. Por eso los grandes espíritus piden este reconocimiento.
So I'll do a short translation. The ceremony was meant to call spirits from the forest, all the spirits from the waters, from the birds, from the trees, our hearts. We call the ancient spirits, the ancient wisdom, and the future wisdom to provide us enough clarity and knowledge in this lifetime to be creative and to talk about the new economies with a lot of inspiration on how the forest and the next generation should live on this planet. This is the call from my sing, from my Ícaro.
Gracias. Gracias, Manari.
Muchas gracias.
And thank you, Belén.
Gracias, Manari.
Gracias.
So, my name is Per Stoknes, and I'm an author and economist, but when I was listening to Manari just now, I was back in the rainforest in Ecuador, in the Pastaza region. Just before COVID, I was sitting quietly watching the rainforest at a walk together with Manari and a group. And he invited us to sit on the ground in the forest so we could watch the stems around us, the twigs, the stalks, all the brown leaves that were covering the active forest floor we walked on completely. Birds were calling, insects, cicadas ringing. And the blue morpho butterfly had passed me and us just a bit further down. And while I was still feeling the presence of that morpho inside, I was only able to intuit a little bit of all that incredible activity happening underfoot, the web of life, underneath that damp leaf cover, and stretching out for hundreds of kilometers in all directions from where Manari lives. It was very peaceful. Also sweating hot after walking briskly. And while sitting there, I started hearing a sound, a breeze-like sound, except it wasn't a breeze rustling the leaves. No, it was water. Now it sounded more like a river, building in strength. But this river was coming from above and coming closer. Steadily. Ah yes, soon I could see some raindrops hitting the leaves, making the forest sing even more intensely, with a million hits on thirsty leaves overhead. Everything started to shake, certain leaves here and there, making them dance, swinging. And before long, the raindrops were all around, huge, amazingly dense. But a palm leaf overhead kept me dry for a little while, but then I got drenchingly wet, immersed in that life-giving wetness, that vitality from the sky that keeps the rainforest being exactly that. The rivers from the sky joining the rivers on the ground, moving west in the clouds and east in the rivers, interweaving their waters all the way back and forth to Atlantic, which they have been doing for 50 million years. That old ecosystem circling its life, death, living processes still going vibrantly. But they are now under a threat, a double threat. It's the logging and mining from extractive industries that are now encroaching on the Amazon from all directions, along with the agro industry for meat and soy. And then on top of that, there is global warming. Both those threats are caused by our current version of capitalism and the financial system that underpins it and upholds these extractive capitalist forms. Now, this way of operating an economy and our society we inherited from the 1900s. This is the source of destruction, both of indigenous nations, such as the Zapara, which is the nation that Manari comes from, as well as the forest. So, can we do better? Some would prefer to throw out capitalism in the dustbin, but can we make new versions, given that it's not so easy? New versions that work for the forest rather than against it. An enlivening economy rather than an extractive version that we know too well. This is the topic of my latest book, Tomorrow's Economy. So, in it, I do an analysis of what I call the grey growth. Because the tragic realization that I've done over the years is that all that destructive, both of that destruction of that forest and of these cultures and of the climate, comes from a flaw in the design of the industrial economy from the 1900s. And the word I think is best to use for it is wastefulness. So we take all those resources from the forest, from the minings, from the ocean, and what do we do with it? Well, mostly we throw it away unused. And we do take ever more of it, as this graph here shows. This is the material throughput of the economy. Biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals. And in the biomass, of course, that's where the forest comes in. So on the left axis, it's all the billion tons of materials. On the right axis is the economy measured in money. And the main point with this graph is to show you that for about 50 years or more, we've built the money economy by taking more and more stuff from nature and encroaching on the forests. And in order to make one more dollar, we typically use 1 kilogram of material, either biomass, fossil fuel, metals, or minerals. Now, tomorrow's economy cannot continue with this wastefulness, but we can continue creating wealth, but while taking down material use dramatically. For instance, in the EU, and the US economy is quite similar to this one, we process about 7 to 8 billion tons of, again, biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and minerals. A lot of this comes from Ecuador, fossils and mineral and trees. In Europe, we're 500 million people, which means that's about 40 kilograms of stuff per person per day. And then we lose 90% of it after 1 or 0 time use. It goes to the air being burnt, or it goes to landfill. Only 10% of 4 kilograms is used to create value more than once. So 10% is recycled and 90% is wasted. For instance, if we buy a Big Mac with beef that also comes from the meat farms, the grazing agriculture in the Amazon, 10,000 calories of biomass has been used, 2.5 kilograms of CO2 to create 500 calories of human energy or consumption. That is a 95% waste of all the stuff. But if we change to a plant-based burger, suddenly we cut that waste from 95% to 50%. All the world's animal feeds are shown on this graph. So a lot of soy, corn, a lot of silo and hay, and a lot of pasture. And if we make beef out of it, only 3% reaches the store, while 97% is lost as waste. So the crazy thing is that we destroy that forest mainly by taking stuff we don't even use. On top of this, of the 10% we do recycled, and it's mainly 3 value chains where all that wastefulness happens. It's in mobility, food and buildings. And when we recycle 10% of the tons, still we lose half of that value again. So we have a complete 95% loss of value after the first use of the average resource. Can we do better? And tomorrow's economy is about that, removing this wastefulness that we've inherited. And happily, we do have all the solutions. One study identified 21 end-user innovations that could eliminate most of the energy waste we have. They found that if we could now scale up in Western and modern and other types of economies to those solutions that keep us moving around, living well, having comfortable houses, temperatures, then we don't need 90% of all the oil we also extract from the Amazon and Ecuador, and of course from Norway and the fracking in the US, etc., because we deal with the energy in a much smarter way. So there are lots of fantastic new opportunities, and a lot of good stuff is happening right now. What I would call a green wave of innovations driven by 7 drivers, which I will not go into in depth now, but we could if there are questions. Is that renewables are becoming cheaper than oil, coal and gas. And ESG, as this whole series is about, is suddenly for real. As you heard in the introduction, more than $50 billion just last year's. Also, material flows are going more digital and circular. We know where they are and we can upcycle them, recycle them. Investors are fleeing climate risk. We've seen that on coal. It will happen on oil. It is happening on oil and gas. The 5th driver is that for the first time, humanity has come together in a common plan called the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. So this is kind of dribbling down into all strategy sessions around in the world. How are we positioning ourselves relative to the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate goals? Then we've heard recent news about the G3, which is US, EU and China. All have now recently set net zero targets. They want to go circular. They have green action plans, and we have a financial taxonomy coming up. And finally, COVID has resurrected the idea of active government. So the neoliberal idea that government should only stay back and don't intervene, but let the free market run its course, has obviously grounded. Now these 7 together make it possible for us to change the direction of the economy towards a healthy growth. But we can do all these 7 and fix the climate, but still we're left with another huge sustainability issue, which is intolerable inequality. So some areas of the world, like India, like South Africa, the 10% richest take 7 times as much income on average as the 40% all together. This is something called the Palma ratio, and you can measure how much the 10% richest is taking relative to the 40% poorest, pulling society apart. In the Nordic countries, it's more like this. The 10% richest have the same amount as 40% poorest, and this has also been defined as a tolerable inequality level, or shared prosperity. While in Ecuador, where we will return very soon, it's about 3. So the 10% richest of Ecuadorians have the same amount as the 40% poorest taken together. So what we need is not just a green growth, we need a fair growth. So we can increase the wealth, but give the 40% poorest more of the big pie. Healthy growth in tomorrow's economy is defined as both green and fair. So we shift the wealth creation towards a better nature and a more stable society where it's inclusive. Now, how does this look on the ground? All these graphs may be good or maybe not, Stoknes, but do you have a concrete example? And I do. So this is why I will shortly describe a project that I started after visiting Manari and Belén and the Ecuadorian forest in the Pastaza region. So on the way back I had a dream, and in the dream I envisioned a financial structure that could concretize and bring forth a healthy growth for this region. So in the Achuar Nation, which is next to the Sapara, there's 800,000 hectares of intact rainforest. And how can the best protectors, we all know, for stopping logging, stopping roads, are the indigenous nations themselves. So where is this? This is a map. Here you see the Andes mountains, and the Pastaza area where I visited and where Manari and Belén is working is here. It looks like this from the plane, and it looks like this when we land. And if you're lucky, you can meet girls like this or walk along the river. So we put together a team. And this team is now working to put together a generation fund that can provide basic income and health and a better economy for indigenous nations in this area. This team consists of Domingo Perez from the Achuar Nation, Bill Twist, who founded Pachamama Alliance, Juan Carlos Garcia, who works for Fundación Pachamama, and last but definitely not least, Belén Paez, who runs Fundación Pachamama. She wasn't present when we took this picture, but she's happily present on this call. I will explain in a minute when I hand over. So what we've done is to map all the balsa forest, because the balsa trees are the precious timber that is now driving deforestation in this area. And the deforestation happens primarily along down this river, because you can transport the timber on the river. So the project that we plan to do that illustrates healthy growth is we create a bottom-up legal land rights-based fund to support indigenous nation forest conservation efforts beyond the top-down central government support. And we want to provide a basic income from the households in the area so they can continue to protect the forest against mining, against logging, against roads. We start with a community called Xaramensa, and they're also part of the NAE, the Nación Achuar Ecuador. It's about 8,000 square kilometers, so 800,000 hectares. And if we're successful, we want to expand to other indigenous nations across something called the initiative of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon, which is where all the rivers, all the river tributaries to Amazon begin in the Andes. Why now? Well, just after I left, there was a perfect storm of COVID hitting, high balsa wood demand, and also inrush of money into indigenous community life. And they do need dollars for healthcare, for transport, for food, schools, and food security. So the idea is to set up a new type of generation fund where we reconfigure capitalism to work for the forest, more than destroying it, encouraging sustainable agroforestry skills. So we're working on a balsa master plan where it's possible to harvest some balsa, but in a sustainable way, not logging everything down and leaving a wasteland. When are we doing this? Belén and the team have been doing local involvement and gaining acceptance, both with Xaramensa and the NAE, over for more than a year now. The project has started and the first payments are distributed, and the fund to be established is from January 2022. And who is this? Belén will say more about Fundación Pachamama, but it is our Ecuadorian main partner, supported by Pachamama Alliance in USA. And we also work with conservation agencies such as WWF, CI, and myself, who's based at the Norwegian Business School. How much? This is scalable, but communities typically need in the order of $50,000 per year, backed by a 30-year investment fund with a principal capital of about $1 to 10 million US dollars. So that's where we're going to head later, and then to see if we can reconfigure finance and capitalism to help the forest and the indigenous nations rather than destroying them in a splurge of wastefulness, as we have been doing for the last 50 years. So with that, are you still there, Belen?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
Good. So I'll turn off my camera and you turn on yours.
Okay. Thank you, Per. And ¿qué pasó con esto? Okay, I'm here and I'm ready to see if it's possible that I can share my screen. And
yeah, that should be.
Okay. So I will let you know something about me, and thank you, Per, for this introduction, and also thank you for Manari to be with us. And it is a pleasure to be with you. And I've been working in the tropical rainforest for the last 25 years now. And definitely to have this partnership with Per and with the Norwegian government. Actually, Ecuador has been really tight on their public policies on climate change. And we have been really lucky to have funding from the Norwegian government to protect forests in Ecuador, as well in Peru and Colombia. But I will share with you an initiative that is a really great opportunity for all of us in this moment of lifetime. And when I was listening to Per explaining about the initiative that we are currently implementing on the Achuar territory, I found these initiatives really proactive, really ambitious, really creative. And this is for now what we really need to create a new ways of innovation and collaboration for the protection of one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, which is the Amazon region in the Andes, and Andes Amazon, which is located in Ecuador and Peru. So I'll share with you this initiative, which is called the Amazon Sacred Headwater Initiative, which is an advancing bioregional and indigenous-led governance and stewardship. It's not a project, we call an initiative with its horizon of 10 years from now. And we have been working for over 25 years, but especially the last 4 years, really close to indigenous organizations in Peru and in Ecuador. And in Ecuador, the regional of that represents 11 different nationalities of indigenous peoples is called Confeniae. IDECEP is a pretty similar organization in Peru. And also we work with the One Piece people and the Achuar people in the next border in Peru. And Fundación Pachamama and Pachamama Alliance has been collaborating with this initiative so far. This is what we see. I don't know why I cannot stay here in this. So this is the governance structure, how we are working. So we have a governance council with all these indigenous organizations. This is a really oriented territorial planning instrument that we have developed over the last 2 years and a half. So we have different groups of working groups, the legal public policies group, the regional international advocacy, the communications team, the fundraising group, the economic and financial mechanisms area. And we work through what we call the bioregional planning, which is a new way of development and planning. And we found bioregionalism as a new technique that show us that we need to transit into an emerging new paradigm that is called the bioregionalism. And when we mention this word is that we really need to go from an anthropocentric vision into one that is more ecological oriented. So this is the way that we are taking decisions, making decisions, and we have the participation on over 35 indigenous nations among Ecuador and Peru, and it's really large. The surface that we are working in is the whole Amazon region of Ecuador and also a good portion of the Amazon in Peru. This is a quote on a leader from Peru that says that indigenous peoples of Peru and Ecuador still live in our ancestral territories, and we really want to live a dignified life and ensure the well-being of the planet. So I'm sorry about this. So we have 5 tracks to accomplish all these huge goals, very bold. This is a very bold initiative, and that's for us the new way of see things. We cannot see things like in a really small scale. We need to be very ambitious to protect the Amazon over the next 10 years. So we need to focus on convening indigenous nationalities. They have been putting together, they have their one vision about protecting permanently the Amazon region. Our ambition is to set strategic frameworks, alternate development pathways, and scenarios for an economic transition to a post-carbon era aimed at safeguarding the ecological integrity of the sacred headwaters. We really want to advance to the international visibility of the region and build corresponding support for a huge network for this initiative, and to engage civil society, scientific, academic institutions, governments, private sector to co-create alternative economics and scenarios which ensures the region ecological integrity and human well-being. So we have a strong indigenous-led regional alliance as an outcomes. The Bioregional Ecological Plan economic strategy is agreed to be a key stakeholders, including governments and civil society. We have a long-term financing plan agreed to by stakeholders, and we have some initial commitments as the one is Per mentioning today. And we definitely want to not have expansion of extractive industries in this area. Oil, mining, land use change made from monocultives are not part of this plan. Basically, what we need over the next years is to protect the most biodiverse places on Earth. And this bioregional plan, that is the work over the last 2.5 years, we have worked with 50 different consultants and people that are really looking forward to see all these dynamics in between ecological systems, social inequalities, how it looks like the communication, transportation, education, health on this region, the next period. And we really want to improve the living conditions and maintaining biodiversity and cultures, the unrestricted defense of the rights of communities and peoples and recognitions of indigenous territories, and eliminate deforestation is crucial, and keep fossil fuels and mining large-scale projects under the ground, avoid large-scale mineral and forest extraction, restore, regenerate, and reforest forests, and achieve territorial governance. And the vision for 2030 is that we will have this area acknowledged as a live organism that will proliferate and will maintain their life cycles. And the indigenous peoples of the Sacred Headwaters bioregion are the stakeholders who have the local knowledge, but also they are doing their best effort to make decisions over this territory and over their economic systems. So the Bioregional Life Plan is a tool and a launching of a point for the shared vision of permanently protecting the Amazon Sacred Headwaters.
Belen?
Yes, I'm like just going to the end.
Okay, because there's a question. So you want the question afterwards? So you complete the
yes,
presentation?
I'll just finish and you can go with.
Go.
So So what we would like to ensure is that we would give to the government some answers to the post-COVID crisis. We need to create a movement on civil society, indigenous peoples, private sector, universities, to put limits on the expansion of these extractive industries in the forest. We need to legalize indigenous forests and territories, ensuring the good living, the buen vivir in the Amazon, improving the living conditions of the Amazon populations. We need to work really hard on the legal protection of over 20 million hectares on highly biodiverse places. And for sure, we need to also create these funds, this structure, this governance and financial structure to receive the funds all over the world to be able to start implementing these prototypes, these initiatives that will shift the way that the Amazon now, for now, is being developed. Buen Vivir is premised on giving and receiving in an ongoing process of reciprocity, complementarity, and solidarity. So this is one of the principles on what we call beyond economic development, the Buen Vivir. And what's the roadmap that we see is that we are looking so far to create some investments to finish this first phase, to finalize the bioregional plan, to create more possibilities to engage local governments, national governments, private sector into the engagement of the initiative. We see 2021 to 2024 and 2025, a process where we need to implement the initiative. But before we go to the implementation phase, we need to see how we can engage people around the world, investors, people who are working on different concepts on the ecosystem transitions. So we need to raise around $3 million now to create a big team, because now we are like 10 people working on this huge initiative. And we have been very fortunate because we have a lot of results so far, but we really need to engage people as you in this transition phase before we go to the implementation of the prototypes. As the project that we are showing you with PERT today, we need to raise funding so we can have a team to think very thoughtful and deep into what is really needed to create an innovative system of collaboration. So I'll let you now here telling that Sacred Headwaters and what we are doing in the Amazon territory, in the Achuar territory in Pastaza, is a really crucial opportunity for everyone, for our life transition into a new ecological civilization. So this will be my sharing for now, and I'm open to the questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Belen. And Per Espen, please do join us as well. And there's a few questions that have been emerging in the chat, really going to the very blunt heart of the matter about how much money, or it's almost how little money, is required to have how big an impact on a very large number of people. I don't know, Per Espen or Belen, who's best to answer those?
I'm happy to jump in there. So maybe there was a little bit confusion because when I was speaking about the generation fund for the Achuars, this was from a limited area in the Pastaza region. While Belen now brilliantly drew up the big picture, because the Sacred Headwaters is the entire Amazon as it meets the Andes, where the rivers, all the rivers start. That's the headwaters.
And it's not bounded by the national boundaries that we know.
So it goes across Peru, Ecuador, and up to Colombia in particular. And the exact amount of money it's not just an issue of finance here. It's really about grounding this in the communities. So that's why Belen and Juan Carlos and Domingo Peas have spent a year discussing this. How is this supposed to be implemented? How will they distribute the money? Some of these communities hardly have a bank account. and the individual here doesn't have individual ownership rights, it's the community. So the issue is, how do the families organize themselves within the community? So if money enters into these communities, it doesn't cause more conflict, but it is used to create what we could call a healthy economy for those communities. So I think the right way to approach here is bottom up, rather than the typical red approach that has been used by governments to kind of sprinkle some money from the central government to the regions and the provinces, and then possibly to the communities, but very much later. So this would be a much more bottom up organization, where the communities get access to predictable basic income, as long as they document twice a year approximately that their area, their legal territory is preserved and conserved and protected. So I think this will be a long scale process where we start with communities that are willing to start, because some communities prefer to sell to their balsa to some merchants traveling up and down the rivers. And this has been a lot of the work over the first year, to get really the communities to understand what is a basic income, what kind of generation fund do for them, how do they have to protect and report if they are to receive these revenue streams. So Belen, please fill me out, and then I can say a bit more about the other issues there. But Belen.
Sure. Yes, I'm sorry if you have any misunderstood of what we're presenting here, but we are presenting something really specific on a territory, which is the Achuar territory in the Pastaza region. But it's important also to see how important is to see this as on a larger scale initiatives for over the next 20 years. So in terms of what we are doing with PER in the Achuar territory, we definitely have a lot of experience into working with the Achuar people for over 25 years. They are every time more challenging in regarding preserving their territory, lands, and securing their rights. And what we are trying to make sure in the next 5 years so far is to stop the deforestation in this area, and bring in this compensation, so the people, they know what they are going to use their resources for. They basically need for emergencies. They have these conditions under the forest that if you might be able, perhaps you can be have an emergency because you were bitten by a snake, and you cannot fly really easy to the next city to be attended in the hospital. So we need fundings for attend basic needs, emergency, food supplies, education, and transportation. And they already have decided what is this budget that they are going to need for, what is going to be distributed, how women are going to participate in the distribution of this fund. And we will be always monitoring with geographers, with an international university, that they will be monitoring that they are fulfilling their commitments on not doing deforestation in these areas. And this is really unique and really new, because the government of Ecuador is providing sources to protect forests and compensate for it for indigenous people. But sometimes this is very bureaucratic systems that we're really delaying the payments to the communities. And what we are trying to do is something more agile, more accurate, more updating the way that we are working directly with the community day by day. So this is the difference between a bilateral commitment, financial commitments, and what we can do as teams, our groups and NGOs and private sector. So this is a way of collaboration and innovation. So the Sacred Headwaters definitely fulfill, from the 17 SGDs, we are fulfilling 14 of them. This is a really bold initiative. We are not just looking for forest conservation and restoration, but also about education and bioeconomies, to combating poverty in the communities. We are working about in transportation, energy. So we are becoming a really bold and amplifying all the needs for the community, so we can really answer and resolve in collaboration with the communities their needs, so they cannot go out there to commit deforestation because they have so much pressure. And
I was going to say that's fantastic, and I was just going to jump in with a quick comment. And I'm about halfway through Per Espen's book now. It's quite well thumbed, as you can see already, and of course this book is about much more than just one region or one particular type of problem. And for me, the point about the example of indigenous nations in the Amazon is this type of thinking can apply there as it can apply in many other places around the world. The way that you apply it has to be customized to the local environment you're dealing with, which is what I think you're doing so well. And I thought, Per Espen, would you maybe comment about a different version of this in a very different world, if you look at whether it's what's happening in the United States rebuilding from COVID or whatever else? How does this type of thinking apply in this world, which is closer to home for some of our audience?
Exactly. You're spot on, Nigel. So tomorrow's economy is about the global systems shift. The kids have been walking down the streets calling for system change, not climate change. And this needs to happen in all regions of the world. And what I've been trying to provide in tomorrow's economy is a description of how we can shift from a single focus on the productive and financial capital forms towards maintaining natural capital. So how much do we have to change the resource wastefulness in our conventional economy in order to no longer push the forests, push the planetary boundaries, push the ecosystems towards those tipping points. And we could measure that per company, per city, per sector, per country to see whether we're doing enough to change the system or too little. So that's why this idea of the resource productivity provides operational quantitative measurement of how much pressure we're putting on the natural capital. And then, as this project also illustrates in the Pastaza region, it's not enough simply to improve the resource productivity if you keep 40% of the population marginalized. So I also provide a toolbox where basic income is just one out of about 20 tools to deal with that other huge sustainability problem, which is the steadily increasing inequality in most regions of the world. So this
it makes thoroughly good sense to me. I mean, my background, as many people know, is in finance, and I originally studied accounting. And of course, very early on in that career path, you learn all about the idea of making or maximizing the return on your scarce resources. The scarce resource is usually seen as something financial, because of course when people developed this thinking in the 18th and 19th centuries, no one was worried about the capacity of the planet, or for that matter the capacity of society. And we're now in a place where the physical capacity of the planet is a very real issue, and indeed what we do for people is a very real issue too, given the effects of robotization as they flow through society, certainly in the West. So it's
and particularly also when it comes to those people who are best in the world to protect the natural capital, the indigenous nations, they also need to be connected in a kind of careful way with the global economy, so that it can be a mutually beneficial relationship and not just the extractive exploitation that we've seen over the previous years. So that's why I've tried with this idea to exemplify a new model of collaboration between indigenous wisdom and financial practices. And that's what I find very exciting, and I think it would be key to tomorrow's economy. And I find both the work of Manari and the work of Belen and the sacred Headwaters a fantastic example of how this new type of healthy growth, a healthy economy can be achieved. But as you point out, Nigel, tomorrow's economy is much more than this local example. It's the other way around. This local example is a perfect illustration of what the book or the grander systems change is about.
Yeah, look, it's fantastic, as I know we're heading rapidly towards the end of our hour together, and I was going to just remind everybody one of the most important lessons I ever learnt about sustainability is that if you're thinking of following a new idea or new path, speak to someone from Norway first, because they've almost all certainly tried some version of it. So I urge everybody who's here today or who's listening to this, do buy Per Espen's book. I've thoroughly enjoyed the first half of it. I won't pretend to have finished it yet. But it's been really, really thought-provoking. And maybe just, as we come towards the end, I'll get each of you to make just a kind of brief comment or something you'd love people to take away, something they can perhaps go and act on after this. And just to give you 30 seconds to think, one other idea that's embedded in this book is, we're obsessed with growth in businesses and endless exponential growth, whereas in the natural world that isn't what happens. So there are currently about almost exactly 8 billion people on the planet, and if I remember the numbers rightly, somewhat more than 3 trillion trees. The 8 billion people are a problem and the trees aren't, because the trees fit into their environment. They reach a natural size. What they leave behind in terms of waste is beneficial for the rest of the ecosystem. And that idea of quality rather than quantity is very powerful. And if you're in a business, this is about more reliable earnings, lower risks. It's not necessarily about making your business bigger. So with that as my takeaway from the book, I'm interested, and maybe go to Per Espen first and then Belen next, for what's one thing you would like people to go away and do when they stop watching today?
If you, since this is a financial kind of context that you're working in, Nigel, I would love for people to really think about how their money is working in the financial system for them. How can you start shifting that towards the use of that money for a better natural and better social capital, wherever that is. It doesn't have to be Ecuador. It can be any ecosystem around you. It can be any social intervention that's needed, some stimulus from the way your money can work for you. And Belen?
I would like to add that this is the perfect time to engage in something really large. And this is the time to see how we can definitely see these systemic transformations and systemic transitions into something possible in different scales. Even that I'm here in the forest, I need to understand better how we can ensure the new measurements to see how good living, protection of the waters, the forests, the ecosystem services are like being able to survive and to give us life. So this is the perfect time to invest, to learn, to collaborate. And I really would like to invite you to see these perfect connections with the Amazon, with PER, what we are doing here, and sending you a lot of love and energy from the forest.
Tres en punto.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And perhaps ironically, the way that ESGX was born was that we were supposed to, both Paul Herman and I were supposed to be speaking at a conference related to ESG in New York in March 2020. And a big element of that would have been all to do with things related to measurement, etc. And of course, that conference died thanks to COVID, and ESGX was born in its place. So the theme that you've both touched on here, I think, is amazingly important, and we're going to come back to in a month or two's time. And that is, right now, there's a huge amount of focus on ESG. Lots of investment managers are gathering money in ESG related funds and ETFs. Every listed company CEO of any large company is being asked about ESG at most meetings, but a lot of what's going on is still very superficial and doesn't really judge impact particularly well. It doesn't necessarily look at, do businesses perform better if they're doing things to do with sustainability, which of course they should. And thirdly, what it doesn't do is provide an assessment for individuals. If you're putting something into a green fund or another green fund, which one is better? Which one is having greater impact? And all of that kind of scrutiny is coming and is coming quite soon. So I think we should all look forward to that. So let me just end by saying a really sincere thank you to Per Espen and Belen joining us from two different continents, the northeastern corner of Europe and the northwestern corner of Latin America. And just looking ahead very briefly, we have coming up next week our regular Green Jobs Report, and this will be the Green Jobs Report for May, where we will look at the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty in detail. And then a week after that or so, which is the 8th of June, we have a very special episode, Clean Break, all about the challenges of single-use plastic and how we can get it out of our ecosystem, joined by Philippe Cousteau, Tom Saki, and a host of others. So this should be really quite fantastic. And indeed, beyond that, we have events coming up for Refugee Day and for greening your retirement. It's not too late to do that. And my own investments have been in a fund which has been very much linked to sustainability, and I'm very happy with how that has performed. So I think that is where we'll end today, and we very much look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for joining us, and please remember, do share with your friends, do post on social media. If you're joining us on YouTube, press the like button and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it.